And Jerry, the floor is yours.
And please make sure to mute your audio, except unless you're Jerry. Thank you.
Christos and Maggie, thank you. We seem to be having difficulties here also. I can't see any of my slides. Can you hear me?
All right, let me make you a presenter again. Somehow it dropped off and you were a presenter, so once I do that again, you should be able to share your screen. All right, it looks like you're starting to share now. We see a pinwheel and it says you're sharing your screen, so it should be on very shortly. And there it is.
We're good to go, Jerry.
Good to go.
Okay, good. So you can see the title slide there. The sea saved humanity once, can it do it again? And this is based on a presentation that I made to the World Aquaculture Society this past March in New Orleans. So, humans and food. Modern humans date back some 200,000 years, and for more than 95% of our history, we were hunter-gatherers living in small bands of 20 to 40 extended families. We wandered around across the landscape in search of food with the seasons. 70,000 years ago, a volcano called Toba in Indonesia erupted. Some contend that it spewed out so much ash that the entire Earth went into the equivalent of a nuclear winter for several years. Temperatures crashed and much of life was extinguished. Not all scientists agree with this, but enough do that it makes an interesting story. About this same time, modern humans almost went extinct, and some ascribe it to this event. The population of humans was reduced to fewer than 10,000. Many lived in caves near the, this just shows the coverage of the ash from Toba. Many lived in caves near Pinnacle Point, which is on the east coast of South America. And they survived by eating shellfish and finfish, and a number of scientists contend that the ocean and seafood saved our species from extinction. And this probably, Curtis Marin is the primary advocate for this statement, although a number of others now have agreed. So the question is, can the ocean and seafood save us again? It might have to, and here's why. About 10 to 12,000 years ago, there was a major change in human food practices. Humans, for the first time, began to practice agriculture. Global population was estimated to have been about 5 to 6 million. With a predictable food supply, people could now settle down into villages, villages became towns, towns became cities, and population exploded. Through a series of green revolutions, we avoided the mass extinction from starvation predicted by Malthus and Paul Ehrlich and others, but these green revolutions took a toll on Earth. Globally, aquaculture uses 70% of all developed water, more than half of Earth's ice-free land surface. It completely altered the nitrogen cycle. Nutrient-rich runoff produces dead zones in the ocean, and there are now more than 400 of these dead zones. So it's clear that agriculture takes an increasingly larger toll on the Earth and on the ocean. It also accounts for about 1/3 of all greenhouse gas emissions. The UN predicts that we will need to produce 70% more food by 2050 to feed another 2 to 2.5 billion people. Present agricultural practices are simply not scalable to meet this demand. There's not enough land, there's not enough water, and the environmental burden is much too large. But of course, future agricultural practices won't be those we use today. There are numerous innovations that are already in place and more on the horizon. And more recent evidence suggests that some of the UN projections on population may not be true. There are new data that with increasing urbanization, now 50% of all the world's population now lives in cities. It's estimated that it will increase to 80% by 2050. And when you move into cities, having 5 or 6 kids are no longer an asset. They don't work in the fields, and so the fertility rate is going down more rapidly as we urbanize. And so some projections have the total population stabilizing at about 2060, the year 2060, and then having a small decline. But in any case, producing 70% more food with climate change is going to be challenging. And this graph shows what happens with an estimated increase of 3 degrees Celsius in crop yields by 2050. So every area that's red or pink, those are areas where agricultural production goes down. The changes in temperature and precipitation regime, you can see, produces winners and losers. The green areas are winners, but on balance, globally, we lose. And experts have predicted that agricultural production globally will decline by 15 to 30% by the end of this century. Today, the world ocean produces about 16% of the world's animal protein, but on a caloric basis, it's much less impressive. It's only about 2%. Some countries depend entirely upon the ocean for their animal protein. Fishing is a very important source of protein, and it has a number of other benefits. It provides jobs and conserves working waterfronts. Working waterfronts are magnets for tourists. But it's clear that fishing cannot meet the demand for seafood. Wild harvests have been flat for decades, and according to the UN in a 2016 report, nearly 90% of all global fish stocks are either fully fished or overfished. Through proper management and setting aside more and larger areas of the ocean for protection, some expansion of wild harvest may be possible, but it would be modest, perhaps 10 to 15%. So the challenge is to create and sustain a safe, secure, stable supply of nutritious food that is scalable to meet the needs of a growing population with the lowest environmental impact. Climate change will increase the probability of major crop failures because of the increasing frequency, intensity, and duration of extreme weather-related events. Floods, droughts, extreme hot spells, and tropical storms. And increases in both daytime and nighttime temperatures, and nighttime temperatures may be the more important of the two, will require shifting to new varieties of the same species or to new species to maintain productivity. And rising sea level will drown many of the world's most productive rice-growing areas. These are deltas around the world. And when this happens, it will reduce a food staple for billions of people on the earth. And increasing water shortages that loom large on the horizon will pose a formidable challenge to agriculture. Every place in this map, on this map that you see red or orange, means there will be chronic water shortages. The ocean offers an important opportunity to expand and stabilize global food production. It covers 71% of the Earth's surface, and the percent is increasing all the time with no end in sight. And it's the most stable environment on a changing planet. It's not that the ocean is immune to climate change, it isn't. But because of the very high specific heat of water and the enormous mass of the world ocean, temperature changes are much less and less rapid than on land. Even so, recent reports have stated that the ocean is warming 40% more rapidly than was predicted only 5 years ago by the IPCC. This change is not trivial, but it is far less than the increase in temperatures on land. The changes in ocean temperature will result in shifts of populations of finfish, and in some cases, regions of the world, losses of both finfish and shellfish. And the ocean is becoming more acidic, and oxygen levels are decreasing at all depths. Some species will adapt, others will decline, and some will go extinct, at least commercially extinct. That is, the populations will decline to the point where it will no longer be profitable to go out and harvest them. A recent paper by Free et al. In Science indicated that the maximum sustainable yield of 235 populations of 124 species that they evaluated decreased by 4% from 1930 to 2010. And within 5 of the ecoregions they studied, the losses were much greater, 15 to 35%. Many fish will move to higher latitudes to stay within their preferred temperature ranges, moving away from historic fishing communities, increasing the cost and the difficulty of harvesting, and taking a huge toll on many of these traditional fishing communities. Young et al. In 2019 showed that for the Northwest Atlantic Ocean, so this is in the New England region, many community trawl fleets, especially those with large vessels, were fishing farther from home, and others with smaller vessels disappeared entirely from the fleets. The movement of community fishing fleets also was a function of catch species diversity. Those fleets with diverse catch species stayed closer to home than those with narrow catch species. These shifts away from traditional fishing communities may open opportunities for mariculture to help stabilize the most vulnerable fishing communities. The effects of climate change will not be restricted to wild fish stocks and wild capture fisheries. Mariculture will also be affected, but the opportunities for management to adapt to a changing ocean are far greater in mariculture than for either agriculture or for wild capture fisheries. Even modest movement of cages vertically in many parts of the world ocean can keep animals within their preferred temperature ranges and also reduce environmental variability. And in some coastal embayments, which are home to shellfish aquaculture operations, in those embayments which have relatively long residence times of the water, pH changes can be mitigated by growing eelgrass, kelp, and other marine plants, and of course through integrated multi-trophic aquaculture. And new varieties and even new species can be engineered for mariculture that are more tolerant of thermal stress and other environmental stressors. The best approach to growing a feeding population is through an integrated model of aquaculture and agriculture, one in which much of the animal protein production is shifted from agriculture to aquaculture. This will reduce the environmental burden of livestock. Wild fisheries will continue to play an important but supporting role. If we could develop this integrated food model, it would reduce freshwater use, land use, greenhouse gas emissions, and it would provide a healthful supply of animal protein. And it could also supply sea vegetables. So I have 3 recommendations. First, the last comprehensive study of the potential of the U.S. Aquaculture was made by the National Academy of Sciences in 1992. And the title of that was Marine Aquaculture, Opportunities for Growth. I think if the U.S. is serious about marine aquaculture, it should consider updating this report. A lot has happened since 1992, and there's any National Academy study, the imprimatur of the academies carries a lot of weight. NOAA would be an appropriate sponsor for such a study, particularly given the Secretary of Commerce's stated interest in increasing mariculture. As I say, 1992 was so long ago that the president of an aquarium was actually the vice chair of the Marine Board. Who would believe that? Second, I think that since the U.S. has never been a significant player in mariculture, particularly in finfish mariculture in the EEZ, and since we have significant research expertise in siting farms, stocking them, feed development, etc. We should think seriously about creating a virtual center of excellence that bring together the expertise that now is so widely distributed into a center, and at least until we get several operating farms within our EEZ. With the largest EEZ of any nation other than France, and much of it has oceanographic conditions favorable for mariculture, the fact that we are the largest importer of seafood in the world is something I think that we should be ashamed of. We have an ethical obligation to become a player in this blue revolution. Third, there are 27 offshore oil platforms off the California coast. They have remaining lifespans of pumping of about a decade. The decommissioning process will begin soon, and there will be a forum here at our aquarium on December the 10th. Among the options that should be considered is the use of at least several of these as hubs for offshore aquaculture farms. We've got 27. There are thousands of these in the Gulf of Mexico. And we're bringing together experts from around the world, where decommissioning has been going on now for a number of years, from the Gulf and from other areas. Aquaculture is a great opportunity for this nation. And you can lead a human to knowledge, but you can't make him think. I'm sure you were told this as you were growing up by your mother. And I think it certainly is true in the case of aquaculture. The scientific case for the U.S. becoming a major producer of mariculture products is strong, but there remains a lot of noisy opposition that comes from small groups, and we simply need to correct their perceptions and move on. So you can imagine yourself stranded on an island, and one person would say to the other, no doubt, is the fish local? So thank you. I would be happy to try to answer any questions that anyone might have. I'm joined with my colleague, Kim Thompson, who is the director of our Seafood for the Future program, and you can direct all the difficult questions to her.
Jerry, thank you so much. We really appreciate it.
Yes. Please feel free, anyone, to ask questions, whether over your phone, your audio on your computer, or in the chat box in Adobe.
Somebody's got to have a question.
Someone typing in the chat box, so.
And we believe, and I think Christos and Maggie agree, that CELC could be a very effective outreach network for getting these messages to the public. I think it's one of NOAA's most effective outreach mechanisms, and the 27 institutions get to. Christos, how many millions do the 27 get to?
It's a little over 20 million a year.
20 million a year. That's a lot. And if we could figure out how to energize this network on messages like this, I think it would be a great service.
Yeah, we agree wholeheartedly, Jerry. I think the work that Aquarium of the Pacific and all the other wonderful aquariums in the U.S. do increasingly is to bring the local communities together and discuss some of those important issues. So we can think very few places that are better suited to engage the public on those discussions.
I totally agree. And people come to aquariums with an inclination to care about marine life and in the ocean. And if you think back to May 6th, when the UN report came out on the extinction of species, the second driver that they indicated as driving species to extinction was over-extraction. And in the ocean, that includes overfishing and illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing. And aquaculture could increase the supply of seafood and take some of the pressure off of our wild stocks.
And Jerry, we have a couple of questions from the chat box. Michael wants to know, you mentioned California. What, if any, options do you see for the eastern seaboard?
Well, I think they're probably pretty much the same. I think California may be the most difficult state in the nation because of the permitting process that strangles any kind of innovative uses of the ocean. And so I think the opportunities are the same on the East Coast as the West Coast, but it will be easier to exercise those opportunities, I think, on the East Coast. And I'm a refugee from the East Coast, having spent 7 years in Boston and 20 years on Long Island.
And we have a couple questions about the oil rigs. Rose asks, are there any concerns with the old oil rigs being dirty and affecting the health of the fish that's raised, harvested there if they were repurposed?
Well, I think if they get repurposed, first of all, they get sealed off so that there isn't going to be an issue with oil. In some of these areas now, Santa Barbara is the one that got the most attention with an oil spill in Santa Barbara, and they want their offshore oil rig removed, and they don't want to ever be reminded of it. But what they forget is there have been natural oil seeps off Santa Barbara for thousands of years. We know how to cap these, and wells on the West Coast, unlike the wells in the Gulf of Mexico, these are relatively shallow. They're far easier to cap than wells that go much deeper.
That's interesting. And then Greg also wants to know if anyone's done a price analysis for restructuring old gas rigs for mariculture, so if there's been a price analysis.
Well, the oil companies that own and operate these are committed to pay the full price of removal whether or not they are removed. And so if you don't remove them, those extra funds go into a fund that can be used to do things like repurpose for aquaculture or for places to monitor and do research on the coastal ocean. Kim is going to give...
Just one minute. So Hub SeaWorld Research Institute also did a lot of looking into the potential for oil rigs many years ago. So while it may be a little outdated, they may have some of that data as well, looking into the economics of doing that.
These are big operations. They house dozens of people, and they're in good locations. I don't think there is any one single use for all 27 of these, and we shouldn't look at them in that respect. But on an individual basis, what are the highest and best uses that we can make of them that might stimulate the ocean economy and that would not harm the environment? It's interesting, if you look at the ocean economy, the U.S. has a very large ocean economy. California has the largest one of any state in the nation. The top three in California components are tourism and recreation, mostly related to beaches. Number two is shipping and goods movement. We have two large ports in Long Beach and Los Angeles. And number three is offshore mineral recovery of oil. And if you look to the end of the century, 2 out of the 3 will be gone, and only 1 will be still thriving. If you believe even the most modest sea level rise scenarios, our beaches will be scrunched, and most of them will be gone entirely. And certainly, oil production only has about a decade or 15 years to go. Shipping and transportation will remain strong, but we need to reinvent the ocean economy of the United States, and I think aquaculture can play a significant role.
And we have another question, a lot of interest on the offshore oil rigs. Chuck wants to know if there are opportunities for aquaculture companies to share resources with the offshore oil producers, such as using boats that take employees to active rigs, and could they also take feed and employees to aquaculture rigs?
Well, I think that probably, as long as they're actively producing oil, it's unlikely that will happen because of the liability issues. And so I think it will become after they cease to produce oil that the opportunities open up. But there are a lot of assets that the oil companies have in terms of ferrying people back and forth and so on. So there might be opportunities for partnerships then.
We have a couple, and some typing in the chat box. And then Jerry, I have a question for you. I mean, what would, you know, as the CEO of an aquarium and as this is an aquaculture, like education-focused webinar, what are some main takeaways you want the public to know that they don't know right now about aquaculture, and how would you recommend educating people in aquariums about it to correct those misconceptions?
Well, first of all, I think the fact that an aquarium will be an advocate for aquaculture, not all aquariums will. We think it's a good conservation strategy. We think it's a strategy that can increase jobs without damaging the environment. And I think we're trying to combat all the misperceptions that were true 10 or 20 years ago. There were a lot of really bad operations in aquaculture. Shrimp farms that destroyed mangroves. We overstocked farms, used too many chemicals. But the U.S. has been a leader in getting rid of those bad practices, and now I would say properly sited, well-managed, well-stocked, and using appropriate feeds, you can produce animal protein in the ocean with far less impact than growing cattle or pigs on land. Chickens are pretty good, but far less impact. Now, Kim is scowling at me, so let's see what maybe she wants to add something.
No, I think you hit it spot on, and I think another responsibility that aquariums have that people tend to forget is our whole collection essentially is aquaculture, and if they're not, you know, raised in captivity, we're trying to figure out how to raise them from captivity so we don't have to capture our collections from the wild. So it is a natural fit. It's just a matter of getting our colleagues on the same page and comfortable with sharing this information with the public.
There's a lot of misinformation about the practice of aquaculture. There's also misinformation about the food. And many people believe that it's better to eat wild than farmed. And if you take salmon, for example, first of all, wild salmon are only available certain times of the year when there are runs. Secondly, the wild salmon is much more expensive than farmed salmon. And so if you think about the health guidelines that we should all eat seafood at least twice a week, if we relied only upon wild, a lot of people would be deprived of eating seafood that's good for their health. And I would also add to that, many of what we think of as wild salmon are actually farmed salmon. They start their life in a hatchery, and then they're released into the rivers. They grow up, and because they're anadromous and they imprint on where they were born, they come back, and the boats are waiting there to catch them. It's called ranching, but it's a form of, it wouldn't exist in many cases if it weren't for aquaculture.
Yeah. Thank you. And we have one more question from Greg, going back to the offshore rigs. Greg said, I know the Gulf of Mexico offshore pens were shot down a year or so ago. Is that based on the writing and naming, or is it the idea that to raise a fish, you've got to kill a fish to make fish meal pellets? What are other issues? Is it farm stock mixing with wild stock?
No, I'm not sure about that particular case, but another one of the misperceptions is that in the feed. It used to be that most of the feed was made up of fish meal. The amount of fish meal that has been created over the last several decades has remained pretty flat. There has been a reallocation away from cat food and farm food for cows and so on to aquaculture, number one. But secondly, there are very innovative food feeds being developed for aquaculture in which the actual meat content is less than 50%. So we're converting what were carnivorous fish into omnivorous fish, and all kinds of innovative things, using waste products from mariculture, using the larvae of and plant life. So the feed situation, I think, has changed dramatically just within the last 2 or 3 years. Kim, you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, so it looks like you're also asking specifically with the Gulf of Mexico ruling that happened. And A big part of that isn't really, I would argue that the environment was maybe used as a scapegoat there because it was mostly actually stakeholders. So it was the fishing communities that came out and some local NGOs. So it was a really small but very politically powerful group. And, you could argue either way of whether or not aquaculture should be managed under the Magnuson-Stevens Act. That's a different conversation, but I would argue that it was mostly those interest groups that just had a lot of political clout that were able to get it shut down.
It's very clear that we have to look at the ocean differently now than we did 10 years ago, because with population increasing and with climate change, the ocean is going to have to provide more food, more energy, more minerals, and we have to figure out how to do this so that it does not damage the ecosystems that we depend upon. But I think we have the knowledge and the technology to do it.
Okay. I have one other question just popped up as well. Chris asks, has there been any research into how the quality or health of the fish changes, if at all, when the innovative feeds do change the fish diet so that carnivores are now omnivores?
No, they've been side-to-side taste comparisons, and I'm not aware of any differences. Kim, are you?
Yeah, they've done a lot of research into this, and I know Mike Russ is on the line, or was on the line, and could speak to this a lot better, but generally speaking, what they're finding is through these feeds, they tend to come out, the fish tend to be healthy, and that's what they're designing these feed profiles and nutrition profiles for, and the taste tends to still come out of a high quality. Not always, it's not a one-size-fits-all, but generally speaking across, they've been doing a good job of testing for that. And really, if you think about it from the company's point of view, it doesn't make sense for them to invest all this money into an alternative feed that's going to come up with a crappy product.
So if Mike Russ is still on the phone, Mike, I think you should encourage the National Academy to update that study that was done in 1992. There's nothing like the imprimatur of a National Academy study to maybe not change the public's minds, but decision makers. And I think it would be well worth the cost.
I think it's gone.
Yeah, we'll make sure to relay the message. All right, well, unless there's no other questions, we'll wrap up a bit early. For those of you who didn't hear in the beginning of this presentation, again, we're the Coastal Ecosystem Learning Center Network, and we have a variety of initiatives we do across our network of 27 aquariums across North America. And if you're not aware of the CELC network and want to learn more, please feel free to contact me. My name is Maggie Allen again, and we'd be happy to talk more or add you on a listserv to keep you updated on future webinars that we're going to have about aquaculture. We hope to do one. We're doing them about quarterly, so our next one will most likely be in August at some point, and we'll keep you updated on who that is, who will be the presenter, and when that will happen as well. So thank you all for coming. Again, let us know if you have any other questions, and thank you again, Jerry. It was really a great presentation, a really great overview of how aquaculture can save humanity and restore local ecosystems and coastal communities. So thank you again. It was really great to have you.
Thank you, Maggie and Christos. Enjoyed being with you.
Thanks, Jerry. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, bye.
Bye.